We are in 2024, and you first came here in 1997.
Yeah,
What has changed
man.
then and now?
It's really, really, in some ways, it's completely a different place. And in
Wow.
some ways, it's still completely the same place it was. Um, some examples of that, because I lived in Changna, and it's a new developing city. And the parks, like the way they've already laid out what they want to do there it's just mind blowing to me. The level of organization that's already being applied to some place where there's not a full city built, but there's plans. Like, we know that we're going to have this little canalway and it's going to run all the way down to the end of this valley. And the buildings on the lower floors are all going to be commercial offices, and everything above the third floor is going to be apartment buildings. It's already planned out. And that's really amazing in one way. And then the thing that's also kind of weird about it, though, is that you end up having these some like almost ghost scapes where, like I told you, there's just roads, but there's no buildings, and there's like street lights and like bus stops, but there's nothing out there. And you're kind of, that's really weird looking. Or then I have the other thing where it's like they start to put buildings in, but there's not the demand to live there yet. And so you've got all these kind of like empty shops and empty apartment buildings. This one feels like a bit of a ghost town feel to it.
Yeah.
They didn't plan things like that back in 97. Like you would walk down the street in Danjin, the town I was in, and you're like, there'd be a restaurant and maybe like an automotive shop. And then there was no zoning. It was just like everybody was building whatever they wanted.
Whatever they wanted.
Yeah, if you owned a piece of property, you had a right to build whatever you wanted there. It's like you see one guy would have an old traditional house, and then right next to him there'd be like a 20-story apartment building. You're like, what's going on? And that they were established. Yeah,
the whole place. Like in terms of they marked out places for development. They marked out places and specified that this is a place for maybe a park.
Right.
This is a place for skyscrapers or high-rise buildings. So they were able to differentiate and be able to develop those things. So those has been the changes from 1997 Korea to 2024 Korea.
That one, and then culturally speaking, it's been really interesting too, because they're still very Confucian in many ways. Confucianism, if you read any books before you come to Korea about Confucianism, I think it really makes everything make more sense about Korea. And as much as it's moved away from that, there's still a lot of things that are like if you opened up a book and listed Confucianism, you're like, yeah, that's that. The relationship thing is still very much Confucian. Like it's still all about the 5 relationships, husband, wife, father and mother, parents, children, sibling relations, your boss and your employer, employee. Like those relationships are still really fundamental to understanding what's happening in Korea. And yet at the same time, so many things have changed. Like, I had adult students in my evening class when I was here in 97. And I remember an article came out in the Korean Herald. And they were talking about the first openly gay bar that had opened in Itaewon. And the first thing the article said was it was a Korean man who owned this place. And he was not only the owner, he was a gay Korean man. And he was saying, I opened this place so other gay Koreans could feel comfortable, feel welcome, because we're so shunned here. And so I brought this article to my class, like, let's get a conversation going, right? And I kind of threw it out there. And out of like the 10 adults I had around the room, now it is Danjin was a rural area, so that people are a little more conservative, true.
Yes.
But it wasn't like, I don't agree with that. It was gay Koreans don't exist. Like one of the guys directly said, there are no gay Koreans. And I was like, statistically speaking, there's probably 3 in the room. That made everybody feel like, come there, all looking around. I mean, it's statistics. It doesn't actually there's 3 here, but there's 10 people and 30%.
Yeah.
So now it's very different. Like now, I don't know if I want to say it's accepted completely yet. But it's way different than it was. Like, it's certainly not like something you should shun somebody over or something. I mean, I think for older generation, the old, like for people in their 70s and older, it maybe still be like that. But I find like people my age and younger are definitely like, no, it's okay. So the guy's gay, who cares? Or the woman is a lesbian, who cares? This is not my business. I don't care. That's their life.
Yes.
That's changed a lot. The concept of mixed Koreans.
Yes.
Again, that was another one where I was like, and it was an article about that was an interesting article because it was about farmers. Like there's sort of a negative look at labor, manual labor in Korea. There really is. There's like you don't want to be a laborer. You want to be a white collar person and a doctor, a lawyer. These kind of things are really highly regarded. Physical labor, not so much. Construction workers are really looked down on. Agricultural workers are really looked down on.
Yes.
And this wasn't different in 97. That was still very much, I think it's probably less so now. I think people are more open to the idea that people might want to work with their hands and that there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's changed a little bit. But at that time, so many Korean women were saying, like, I don't want to get married to a farmer. Like, why would I marry a farmer? And so there was already a group of people that were starting to like get married to Vietnamese women and to Filipinos. And so this was already happening, but the people in the society hadn't dealt with it yet. Like, as a mentality, they were still like, there's no, like, again, another comment from one of my adult teachers was like, all Koreans are 100% Korean. And I said, what about the Filipino Koreans? No, they're Filipino. And I'm like, you got something you need to deal with. Yeah. It was really fascinating in that conversation. I had a student named Dr. Han. And Dr. Han was really fascinating. He had gotten a grant from the government to study medicine. And so the deal was he never did his military service. He instead, when he came back to Korea after getting his medical license in the US, he studied at the University of Washington. His brother lived and had a shop in Washington. That's going to become important in this story in a minute.
Yeah.
And so he came back, and the deal was he had to work in these rural community hospitals that were understaffed for like 10 years to make up for this money the government had given him and the right that he didn't go into the military service. That was him paying it back to Korea. And he was totally fine with this. He's like, no, that was the deal I made. I have no problem with this. And the only reason he was in the class is because he didn't want to lose his English, because he had gotten really, really good. He was fluent.
Yes.
And I often told him, I said, you really don't need to be in this class. And like the other students, and he's like, yeah. He's like, but if I don't practice, it's like, and I said, you're right, I get it. But we were having an interesting conversation. That out of that conversation, his comment was, America's a very racist country. And I said, okay, I don't mind having this conversation.
Yes.
I'm okay with this. I said, okay, based on what? What's your experience? I know you lived in America for a while. He said, my brother, a lot of times people will vandalize his store and they'll write terrible racial slurs, oftentimes incorrect ones. Like he's a Korean guy, and oftentimes it says something about being Chinese, and he's like, and I said, you're right. Absolutely. That happens in America. I totally agree with you. I've seen this myself. It's hard to deny it. I said, but not everybody in America is a racist. I said, you have to remember what sells newspapers. Good times don't sell newspapers. And I said, the newspaper isn't reporting on the Hispanic family who got together with an African-American family and a Caucasian family and had a barbecue. But I know that happens because I've been in those situations. That happens too. I said, I think the difference is that we're willing to talk about our problem in America. We're being a little bit more open about it. We're being upfront and saying, yeah, we've got a problem. We've got these relationships that are very, very tied to historical issues and economic issues. And how are we dealing with them? And then I dropped this one. And I said, but what about the Vietnamese Koreans? And he and I could see the light bulb go on. And I said, yeah, that's what I'm talking about now.
Yeah.
And he was like, okay. And I said, yeah. And go, that's what everybody else in the room's not understanding right now. And I said, but that's what I'm talking about, Dr. Han. You're an educated man. You know that there are Koreans that are Vietnamese too. Aren't those people Korean? And he really like, I saw him really kind of, struggle with this concept of like, wow, what does it mean? And now, now they have an entire visa series for people of Korean ancestry. It's like
Yes.
you just come in and say like, I've got a relative that's Korean and I'd like to have an F visa so I can, hang out in Korea. Okay. That's an amazing change. And it's happened in a generation.